what would I say to someone who stumbled on this video because of clickbait? Well, welcome. Hopefully you'll learn something from this and maybe learn how to avoid clickbait in the future.
All right, welcome to Reality Checks with Brian Reitz. That's me. It's the show where guests are asking questions to 1,000 Americans and then try to predict the results. Today, I'm joined by Mike McCue, CEO and founder of Flipboard, an alternative to the news consumption cycles many people are in. So welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining us. And I'm sure there's more you want to add to that intro that I gave.
Yeah, Brian, it's great to be here. I'm excited to hear what people say in response to these questions. You know, what are people's information diet? How do they think about the information that they're consuming? Do they like what they're consuming? Do they not like it? Do they want, do they feel satisfied? Do they feel like they have a healthy information diet? These are all the kinds of questions that I'm excited to hear more about.
Cool. Well, let's dig into the results. And just to confirm, you haven't seen them yet. You don't know what we're talking about.
Correct. Exactly.
So first question, we asked Americans how likely they would be to be described by others as a news junkie. So how many Americans do you think said likely?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to go with probably around 20%.
And why 20%?
Well, it's a hard thing to estimate, but I think that if you look at the content that's consumed now and the number of subscribers to, let's say, the New York Times and other, popular news sources, it probably is roughly about 20% of the population.
Cool. Let's see what the answer was. Yeah, that's just about right.
15%, very likely, yes. Okay, yeah. So that's about what I would have thought. And then the 29% somewhat likely is also, that's pretty healthy. So, I do think a lot of people care about what's going on. They want to learn about what is happening, how should they vote, for example. But of course, what it being a news junkie is probably varies to different people. Some people want like the hard news, what's happening right now, breaking news, things like that. But then also what we see with Flipboard is a lot of people want other kinds of news. So for example, news about places that they want to visit, storytelling around things that they care about, hobbies that they have, right? So a lot of people think of themselves as a news junkie. They want to not just be informed, but they also want to be inspired across their work, their life, their play. And so it's interesting to think about, what is actually a news junkie?
Well, so we did ask, so this is just looking at that sliver, that 15% who said they were very likely to be. Do you think more women or men said they were very likely to be news junkies?
My guess is it's going to be about an even split, but I'll be interested to see what the answer is here.
All right. It's a good, with that answer, you can kind of go, you can be like, oh, I was right. So,
so looks like men are a little bit more than twice as likely to be a news junkie than women.
Or at least about to think that somebody would describe them that way.
Right. That's a hard phrase, a news junkie. And it probably also comes down to what do people think of as the news, right? What kind of content are people consuming? How newsy is it versus how, sort of how informational or sort of inspirational it is?
True. And we'll get into that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
For now, do Americans think they're consuming enough content?
I would say probably a lot of people think that they're consuming too much content.
All right. That one is exactly right. So here, we switched the red around a little bit. So red is bad, too much. And we have too little there. Right. So small, it doesn't fit a number.
Yeah. There's just a massive amount of content. What we consistently hear from people is they want to find the right content. It's very hard in a sea of content on the internet. You know, we have access to more information than we ever have had as human beings. How do you find the good stuff? And that's something that we use. That's why people use Flipboard, is to find the good stuff in this sea of information here.
So just, you saw that we only had 2% there. So obviously the answer is definitely they feel like they're consuming too much. But do you think women or men, either of them, feel like they're consuming too much more than the other?
Well, I guess based on the previous answer about men and women and who's a news junkie, I would say men probably feel like they're consuming too much. I could be wrong, though. We'll see.
It is women, barely, which is interesting because they presumably are consuming less.
Yeah, and still it's too much. Yeah. I mean, this is a big challenge right now that a lot of Americans face. There's so much information. It's being pushed at them in so many different ways. You know, there's the phrase doom scrolling, you know, where people just, you know, scroll through their social media timelines and just see bad news after bad news after bad news. How do you find the stories that really matter, the ones that are truly insightful, that you know, help make you, when you're done, you know, consuming that story, you feel smarter, you feel, you know, a little bit more, you know, like you have a little bit more insight into what's going on or the things that you care about. And that's really hard, you know, when there's so much information coming at you.
So one of the things that we did with the survey was we asked what types of content people feel like they're consuming too much or too little of. So off the top of your head, do you have a few possible topics, or just one, or, you know, but there were a couple that we've listed, but what are people consuming too much of?
Well, I would say that probably, you know, political news is probably the main thing that people are, you know, feel like they're consuming too much of. But then I would say, you know, also just link bait, clickbait, you know, sensationalized stories, things that are designed to get, you know, people clicking. And so I'd say it's probably a combination of those two things.
But I guess if they're consuming too much of it, that means that they are being baited. They are clicking.
Right. And people don't feel good about, you know, being tricked into, you know, watching a YouTube video or, you know, getting baited by a headline only to find, you know, sort of empty calories on the other side. Right. And so, you know, there's a certain amount of content consumption and news reading and YouTube watching that is sort of for entertainment purposes. But a lot of times, you know, you go in, let's say to YouTube, and, you know, you want to watch, you know, cooking videos for something, you know, for cooking you love. And then you end up getting baited by some, you know, video that you really didn't want to go see, but it's some sort of fight between some political leaders and it's sensationalized. You're like, oh, I really should check that out first. And then before you know it, you're like spending time on that content instead of the content you originally came there for, right? So people are getting redirected, and their emotions and their sort of instincts are being sort of, you know, manipulated by these algorithms that are designed to get you to click on things that you just wouldn't normally have decided to, you know, opt into seeing. So that's, I think, a big challenge that a lot of these social media platforms and algorithms are causing right now.
You won't believe what this tech CEO said about the way you consume media.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly right.
We won't do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, just it's been a bit since your answer. I kind of took us off the beaten path, but yeah, national political news, clickbait is kind of popping up a lot. So we're looking, this is ranked by basically the orange minus the green. So orange being consuming too much, green, not enough.
Yeah. You know, and the question really, you know, I think that people, you know, there's the quantity of how much information that they're consuming, but then there's the quality, right? And I bet if you had asked, you know, would you like to consume more high quality content versus, you know, low quality content, you'd probably get people feeling that, yes, they want more quality stuff. so their information diet ends up being a lot of empty calories and sort of clickbait and, stories designed to get people angry, and less about, stories that actually help people understand things that are happening at a deeper level, or, really enrich their lives in terms of the things that they're passionate about and help advance the things that they want to learn more about, whether it's, again, work, life, or play, right? So, it is, there's a quantity versus quality thing, I think, that's going on here.
Cool. And then I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are some of those things people want to consume more of? So this is just topics, not necessarily quality, but just what topics do they not consume enough of, or they feel they don't consume enough of?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, I think quality is a big thing here, right? So I do think that people would want to consume more high quality content about what's happening in politics or what's happening in the news. But also, I think a lot of people want to just like dive into the things that they really care about personally, their hobbies, places they might want to visit, things that they want to, that they aspire to do in the future, cooking, other kinds of things that aren't just, hard news. And so I'd say probably more in sort of the lifestyle category, topics like cooking, outdoor activities, fitness. Those would be the topics I think would, people would really want to consume more of.
Well, the reality was, trips, hobbies, a little bit local news pops up a bit. So,
local, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that and unfortunately, that's an area where we don't have enough content in a lot of places, because a lot of the local publications have shut down, have been drowned out, and that's really unfortunate. And so there are still, fortunately, a decent number of local sources of content, but they're hard to find. And they don't naturally appear in your social media timeline if you get your news from social media. So, that's a big one. We put a lot of energy into local content and local news with Flipboard because of that reason. And, I think when you look at, people want more world news, business, financial news, again, a lot of that is like, well, show me the good, the insightful, high quality content there, not just the clickbait. And then, I think that the science and technology thing is also pretty notable. People want to know how things work. Where are we going, right? The technology revolution that's happening, for example, with AI right now, is something that a lot of people want to understand more. What does this all mean? Where is it going? What does it mean for me, and my future, and my family's future? And science is also, we see that on Flipboard too. People love to just learn about, how things work. How does the world work? Scientific breakthroughs, the science, whether it's biology, whether it's, physics, space, that has definitely been a big topic that we've seen people spend time on in Flipboard. And then the travel one also, I think, is, one of the things that we hear from folks is that they kind of have like this rhythm through the day and through the week where, in the morning they'll check in on, let's say, things around their industry, their work, what's going on broadly in the news. But in the evening, they'll relax and look at content, the more like travel inspiration, hobbies, etc. And so, I think there's different times throughout the day and throughout the week where people will, alternate between these different topics.
Yeah, we did research, I want to say like a year ago, that was about, diet, specifically restaurants and like what attributes they want at breakfast and lunch and dinner. And it sounds like the information diet is similar.
Yes, exactly. And having a balanced information diet is good. And, you have empty calories and you have, nutritional calories, right? And so I do think that, broadly speaking, it's really important for the health of our society, our democracy, our overall future to have a, healthy information ecosystem, and, where people can, really advance how they think about the world and learn and be informed and be inspired about the things that they really care about. So, and it's interesting because, as we said earlier, the world of information has changed massively in the last 20 years. And there's some things that are very challenging right now, but there's also a lot of opportunity. You see a lot of individual journalists who are now making a living, reporting themselves and not being part of a larger news organization, for example. YouTubers who make videos, really high quality, genuine videos about, cooking or photography or traveling or outdoor activities. And people will support those YouTubers with Patreon and other kinds of, models. So there's actually a democratization of storytelling and information creation that's happening and blossoming right now online. The key thing comes back to how you discover all those people. How do you find all the great YouTubers and the great, bloggers and journalists? So that's part of what's happening. So I do think there's a lot of change, but also a lot of opportunity for the information diet overall for Americans to be, even better and more aligned with what they hope for.
Cool. So our last question is, how do Americans feel when they consume content online? A couple of these words have popped up throughout the interview so far. Upset, happy, curious, addicted, entertained, disconnected, connected, overwhelmed, anxious.
Yeah.
So we have to pick three. What do you think?
Oh, three? Yeah. Well, I'd say that overwhelmed is probably the number one is that I would choose here out of these words. Potentially addicted. They're consuming content they otherwise wouldn't normally opt into, right? And people hate that when that happens. You get off of YouTube after being sort of manipulated by the algorithm there, and you're like, where did the time go? I want that time back. I got nothing out of this. I'll pick one of the green ones then. So overwhelmed and addicted would be the two red, words. Let's see. And then I'll go with curious on the green side.
Why curious?
Well, I mean, that's something that I hear from Flipboard users all the time. The reason why they use Flipboard is they're inherently curious, right? That's why they want to advance how they think about things that they're doing in their life. They want to learn woodworking. They want to think about places to travel in the world. They are curious about, what other people are doing that share their, passions. So I do think, science is another great example of people just inherently being curious. And I think what happens is that curiosity sometimes gets intercepted by clickbait and, gnarly, political news. And so then people end up feeling overwhelmed and addicted.
Well, here are the results, which is that curious was number 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And entertained, I think you used that word earlier in the show too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, great content. People don't normally think of news as a source of entertainment, but obviously, if you think of news as like online content, then obviously entertainment is a big part of that for sure.
And then, a lot of things above inspired and happy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool that, people are inherently curious. They want to learn more. They want to, be better versions of themselves. Right. And I think it's really important to build systems and an information ecosystem that allows people to have an information diet like that that feeds those needs, right? And the good news is there are a lot of people who are making the kind of content and telling the kinds of stories that would entertain people, would, feed their curiosity. A good example is Mark Rober on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever watched him, but he's like this. Oh, you should check him out. He's a NASA scientist, but he's very entertaining in how he tells stories, and does all these really cool physics experiments that are fun. And my kids love watching him. And so you're being entertained, you're being educated at the same time by a fantastic storyteller. And the fact that he can make a living doing this, he no longer works at NASA. Now he's just sort of, full-time, content creator. And he's doing great. So he's a great example of the kind of, content creator that a lot of people will want to discover. And, if you haven't heard of him, like clearly there's a lot more people who, I guarantee you, just based on your sort of, how you think about numbers and stats and so on, you would absolutely love Mark Rober's YouTube shows, right? So how do we set it up so that you who are curious can discover Mark Rober and people like him and be able to then watch his videos, which will mean that he can make more videos, and other future Mark Robers and the Mark Robers of cooking and, woodworking and backpacking and surfing and so on can all be discovered and can actually tell really high quality stories that inspire people. And that's a really magical thing when you can find those people and be inspired by what they're doing and learn from them. So, the future is bright. There's a lot of, that said, there's a lot of reform that's needed, with how social media works, how AI works, in order to enable those people to be discovered in the first place, and for them to build an audience that they can own and not be tied to a specific platform in the process. So more coming to, help Americans have, a much, richer, and more enriching information diet.
Yeah. And I assume that people can learn more at Flipboard is the, I don't know if you want to be found, but you're probably on Flipboard is my guess.
Absolutely. So Flipboard is a free app you can download for your phone, your iPad. It works on iOS and Android. And basically the whole point of Flipboard is people recommend stories to people who share the same passion. And so you can follow topics on Flipboard, and then other people who really care about those topics are recommending stories, articles, videos, podcasts, that then you can discover. So for example, I curate stories about space. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, so I love stories about space and advancements there. And I do that in a magazine called Final Frontier on Flipboard. So it's effectively like an online magazine where it has nothing but all the space stories that I think are really great, and I put them in that magazine, and then people can follow that magazine, or they can just follow the topic of space and just learn more about space. And there's millions of these magazines on Flipboard about all sorts of cool topics. Like if you love, smoothie recipes, just making great smoothies, there's a magazine for you on that, right? And these are people who just love to make smoothies, and they put all the best smoothie recipes together into this collection that you can then see. So it's discovering content and stories through people who share an interest. And that's a very powerful concept. It's not just from your friends. It's from people that, you don't know, but they share an interest. They're just as interested in backpacking as you are, right? And they know all the great content, all the great videos to watch if you want to get into backpacking, right? Or kayaking or whatever it is that you want to do in life. So that is what Flipboard is for. It's like a healthier form of social media.
Balanced information diet, I think that's what we.
Yeah, exactly. It's a balanced information diet, and you can use it for news too. We have something called the Daily Edition, which is hand-selected stories from all sorts of different news sources that reflect what's going on every single morning in the news. So you can, and it has a beginning, middle, and end. So you can scroll through it and then you're good, and you're sort of caught up. It doesn't just take stories from one source. It takes stories from a variety of different publishers. They're all high quality, but they might have, a little bit more of a left-leaning or a right-leaning bent to them, or they're more sort of neutral. So you get a little bit more of a well-rounded perspective of what's going on, not just all your news from one particular source. So that's another key thing we try to do, is help people discover news sources for the things that they care about and not just get tied to just one point of view all the time.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining today and for taking the time. And I know these interviews can sometimes be a little tricky, so appreciate you trying out the format.
Yeah, it was great, Brian. I love what you're doing with this, and it was a lot of fun to see what people think about the future of information online, and a lot of hopeful signs here. And it's clear what the work ahead is that we need to go do.
Go to the moon.
That's right. Exactly. Inspire more people.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, Brian.
Hey, thanks for watching Reality Checks. Everything that you saw in this episode was based on a survey of 1,000 Americans about their news consumption and their habits for consuming content online. If you've made it this far, chances are that you are a content consumer yourself, and I've got good news for you. If you head on over to yougov.com/realitychecks, you can consume, in fact, more content. That's right. There's stuff that got cut from today's episode that we have different, gender, generation stuff that just, it's a fixed time. But you're on your own time now. You can dig into the data more, and if you really want, you can run your own survey. In fact, we would like that, because that's what we do. So head over to yougov.com/realitychecks, and thanks for watching.